My parents said, "Remember, your sister's family always comes first. You are always the last." My sister smirked. I answered, "Good to know." And I stopped my financial support. I separated my plans from theirs. The words echoed in my mind as I closed the door to my apartment in Chicago. For once, I wasn't bracing myself for disappointment, guilt, or the familiar tightness in my chest that accompanied every family request. For once, I wasn't preparing to fix problems that weren't mine. For once, I felt calm. My name is Bella, and for most of my life, I had been the invisible safety net of my family. When Ethan, my younger brother, needed help paying for college courses, I was there. When Lauren, my sister, needed someone to cover childcare, I was there. Every year, every emergency, every casual request, whether large or small, landed on me, quietly, consistently, as if it were my role to absorb the pressure. Until now. I didn't reach this point overnight. The pattern had been ingrained subtly, quietly, over decades. My parents never shouted. They didn't have to. Their favoritism ran deep, stitched into gestures, assumptions, and unspoken rules. Lauren received attention, praise, and support. I received responsibility. Ethan received resources. I received expectations. I noticed it first in high school. Ethan needed tutoring, and my parents immediately hired a private coach. I asked for extra help in math, and I was reminded I was independent, capable of figuring it out myself. Lauren wanted a summer trip to Florida. I stayed home to babysit younger cousins, silently adjusting my plans because I had been taught that being dependable was the price of being loved. Even in college, the pattern persisted. Ethan's milestones were celebrated with family gatherings, elaborate gifts, and proud announcements. My successes were quietly acknowledged, compliments offered in passing or folded into another conversation. Nothing dramatic. Nothing public. Just recognition enough to maintain the illusion that love was balanced. By the time I finished college and moved to Indianapolis, the pattern hadn't changed. I earned my own living, paid my own bills, organized family trips, handled emergencies, coordinated schedules, and smoothed crises for the ones who were supposed to be adults. Every quiet success reinforced the family's story. She doesn't need us. She's fine. And I, obediently, became the family's backbone. Until that night. We were on a video call. My parents, Lauren, Ethan. Small talk at first, mundane chatter about weather, work, life. Then my mom, calm and matter-of-fact, spoke the words that shattered the illusion of equality. "Remember, your sister's family always comes first. You are always last." The words landed like a stone in a still pond. But I didn't react like I normally would. No shock. No tears. No excuses. Just recognition. Quiet, unflinching recognition. "Good to know," I said. Something shifted inside me. Not anger. Not betrayal. Clarity. I realized I had spent decades carrying my family's emergencies as if my stability depended on it. And I was done. I began with small changes. Subtle ones. I moved money into accounts only I controlled. I cancelled shared access. I stopped covering expenses that weren't mine. No announcements. No drama. Just deliberate action. When Lauren asked me to cover a bill, just this once, I said simply, "I can't." The reaction was immediate. My mother's voice trembled on the phone. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I replied. "I'm busy." The silence that followed was priceless. They were used to my automatic yes. I was no longer predictable. For the first time, they had to pause. For the first time, they had to wonder if I might say no. 2 weeks later, the ultimate test came. My phone rang. My mother's voice was frantic, hurried. "Bella, something's happened. Ethan was in a minor car accident. Hospital bills, repairs. We need your help. Can you cover it?" I listened calmly. Lauren whispered in the background, Frustration and panic threaded through her words. Normally, I would have jumped, paid the bills, smoothed the chaos, absorbed the gap. But not this time. Instead, I asked a single question: what's the plan if I don't? The silence was instantaneous. My parents looked at each other. Lauren's voice, usually confident and commanding, wavered. We were counting on you. And if I don't? I repeated. That was the moment I had been waiting for. Not for revenge. Not for anger. But for clarity. They had always assumed my compliance. Now, they had to face the possibility that I was not a safety net anymore. That weekend, I reviewed the situation. Hospital bills. Car repairs. Insurance claims. Phone calls. The usual chaos that had always demanded my immediate attention. But this time, I wasn't panicking. I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't absorbing it. I was planning, on my own terms. Monday morning, I called my parents and Lauren to a video meeting. I opened my folder. Charts. Schedules. Conditions. Clear responsibilities. Clear boundaries. This is what I'm willing to do, I said, calm and steady. And this is how. Every decision, every dollar, every step will follow this plan. Anything outside of this is not my responsibility. My mother's jaw dropped. Lauren blinked rapidly, stunned as if I had just spoken in an unfamiliar language. Ethan leaned back, shocked. This is so strict, my father said finally. Yes, I replied. Because the last 20 years of informal assumption hasn't worked. I outlined everything. Insurance communications. Payment allocations. Responsibilities split among them. They couldn't just offload the work onto me anymore. Every expectation had a structure now. Every automatic assumption had been dismantled. For the first time, my parents couldn't take the easy way out. For the first time, they had to be accountable. For the first time, my sister realized she couldn't smirk her way through another emergency. And I realized something deeper. The shock in their eyes was not my victory. It was the truth landing finally. The quiet power of boundaries is more destabilizing than anger. More revolutionary than confrontation. It forces people to face reality as it is, not as they assume it to be. That night, lying in the guest room of my parents' house, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel remorse. I felt the weight of decades lifting. For the first time, the expectations were no longer mine to carry. Over the next 2 weeks, I began noticing subtle changes. Texts from my mother no longer came with requests disguised as casual conversation. Calls from Lauren weren't followed by expectation. My brother, Ethan, paused before assuming I would handle something for him. They were learning, slowly, painfully, that I was no longer automatically available. 2 weeks later, my mother called again, not with panic, but with inquiry. How are you managing your plans? I smiled quietly to myself. For the first time, they were asking permission, not demanding compliance. I didn't answer immediately. I sipped my tea, savoring the pause. I let them sit in the unfamiliar discomfort of not knowing what I would do next. And I realized, finally, I was no longer last. Not because they moved me up, but because I had moved myself out of the line entirely. I had chosen myself. And that made all the difference. 2 days after my video call with my parents, the sense of calm I had cultivated began to collide with reality. The emergency had escalated faster than I anticipated. Ethan's accident, initially minor in their accounting, had revealed hidden layers of financial chaos. Insurance disputes, medical bills, car repairs, and an assortment of unexpected costs that could easily spiral into ruin. But I wasn't panicking. I didn't feel that old reflexive guilt urging me to jump in. Instead, I was observing, cataloging, and planning with the same deliberate care I had applied to every boundary I had just set. The phone rang early that morning. My mother's voice quivered, a cocktail of desperation and disbelief. Bella. I don't know what to do. Can you, please? You're the only one who can help us figure this out. I inhaled slowly. The familiar pull to drop everything and solve their problem was there, whispering, but I let it pass. Mom, I can help. On certain conditions, I said evenly, not apologetically. I need transparency. Written statements of expenses. Proof of payments. A plan for sustainability. Otherwise, I can't be involved. Silence. Then a shaky, we'll do that, she admitted. By the time I finished the call, I had already mapped out a meticulous plan. The first step. Financial triage. Hospital bills first, then car repairs, then ancillary costs. I drafted spreadsheets for every item, calculating which could be negotiated, which could be delayed, and which could not. I scheduled calls with insurance companies, spoke with mechanics, verified statements from the hospital. Unlike before, I didn't absorb the chaos. I orchestrated it, on my terms. When I arrived in Indianapolis 2 days later, the atmosphere at my parents' home was thick with tension. Ethan sat on the couch, pale, his hands trembling slightly. Lauren hovered near the doorway, whispering frantically into her phone about additional expenses she hadn't yet revealed. My parents, usually composed and serene, now looked frantic. They had been relying on my automatic intervention for decades, and suddenly that safety net was no longer there. I opened my laptop and placed it on the dining table. Alongside it lay a binder, expenses, responsibilities, and boundaries. I didn't announce my arrival. I didn't enter with fanfare. I simply sat and began to organize. Bella, can you, please? My mother began, but I stopped her with a calm lift of my hand. This is how we'll handle everything, I said. Step 1. Medical bills. Step 2. Car repairs. Step 3. All other costs. Each step requires verification and accountability. I will facilitate coordination, but I will not cover any expenses without documentation. We will create a schedule, divide responsibilities, and establish deadlines. Nothing else is my responsibility. Lauren's mouth opened, then closed, eyes wide. Ethan leaned forward stunned, the words, "You can't just say no," hovering unspoken. I ignored the reactions. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to redefine the rules. Hours passed. The air grew tense, electric with the unfamiliarity of structured accountability. My parents had never had to negotiate with me like this. They had never had to sit in discomfort while I asked pointed questions. Who is paying this installment? When is this due? Who is contacting the insurance company? What is the plan if these payments aren't approved? Each question was met with hesitation, shifting eyes, and quiet muttering. By mid-afternoon, the initial panic had begun to fade into frustrated realization. They weren't accustomed to me refusing their requests, demanding accountability, and insisting on boundaries. They were learning painfully that I wasn't a default safety net anymore. I remember standing in the kitchen, reviewing hospital invoices, when my father approached. "Bella, why are you being so strict?" he asked, his voice low, cautious, almost pleading. I didn't hesitate. Because the last 30 years of assumptions hasn't worked. Every time I absorbed the burden, you assumed I always would. That's over. He sank back into the chair, silent. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to soften his discomfort. I let him sit in it. By evening, a plan had taken shape. I delegated tasks. Lauren would handle insurance communication for the car repairs. Ethan would contact the hospital billing office and track payments. My parents would review all statements before approval. I would coordinate, verify, and oversee, but only with documentation and accountability. The first night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, absorbing the strange calm that followed this confrontation. I realized something profound. I had been carrying their emergencies as if my stability depended on it, and for the first time, I wasn't. The next morning, the fallout began in earnest. My mother called, voice trembling. "Bella, I don't know if we can manage all this. What if something goes wrong? I smiled softly, surprisingly gentle. Mom, nothing will go wrong that isn't addressed with planning. I will help you manage, but only if you follow the process. Her hesitation, the pause, the deep inhale, everything spoke volumes. She had been relying on my compliance for decades, and suddenly that assumption was gone. She had to step up or face consequences. And she, like everyone else, realized that she could no longer rely on me to absorb chaos silently. Over the next few days, the family worked together, stumbling, making mistakes, arguing quietly, but they worked. Lauren struggled with the insurance company's bureaucracy. Ethan panicked over hospital deadlines. My parents argued over priorities. And through it all, I remained calm, steady, orchestrating the chaos with precision, refusing to absorb it. It was exhausting, not emotionally, but structurally. I had to ensure that every payment, every call, every email was verified. But for the first time, I felt powerful, not burdened. I wasn't rescuing anyone. I was enabling accountability. By the end of the week, every immediate crisis had been addressed. Hospital bills were partially negotiated. Car repairs were scheduled with verified payments. Every family member had taken responsibility for at least one critical task. And for the first time, I observed a subtle shift in dynamics. Lauren looked at me differently. No longer with the casual superiority of a sister who assumed my compliance, but with hesitant respect. Ethan, usually loud and entitled, paused before asking for assistance, realizing I might say no. My parents, for the first time, acknowledged that their assumptions had consequences. One evening, my mother spoke softly while we reviewed the final statements. "Bella, I don't think we realized how much we relied on you," she admitted. I nodded. "I know. And I didn't realize how much I allowed it. I love you all, but I've been prioritizing everyone else at the cost of my life. That ends now." The relief in her voice was tempered by guilt, and I allowed it to exist. I wasn't here to erase discomfort. I was here to enforce boundaries. As the week progressed, I noticed changes not just in them, but in myself. I wasn't bracing every phone call. I wasn't panicking over texts. I was calm. I slept better. I focused on my work. I pursued projects I had put on hold because of my family's constant demands. The most striking change came one afternoon when Lauren asked if I could help coordinate a small family dinner. My instinct to immediately say yes flashed, but I paused. "I can help," I said, "but I will only handle the invitations and catering. The rest is up to everyone else." She stared, then nodded slowly, clearly startled. She realized finally that my help came with conditions, and that she couldn't take me for granted anymore. By the time I left Indianapolis, the crisis had been addressed, and the dynamic had shifted permanently. I wasn't the last anymore, not because my family suddenly treated me differently, but because I had chosen myself. I had removed myself from the automatic expectation, and in doing so, I reclaimed my life. Driving back to Chicago, I reflected on what had happened. For decades, I had equated love with sacrifice, responsibility with worth. I had measured my value by how much I absorbed for others. But this week, I realized something profound. Love doesn't require self-erasure. Responsibility isn't a measure of loyalty. Boundaries aren't betrayal. They are preservation. That night, sitting in my apartment, I finally understood the true power of choice. I could choose to be the family's safety net, or I could choose myself. And by choosing myself, I hadn't abandoned them. I had forced them to grow. I had forced them to face reality. And for the first time, I felt seen, respected, and whole. It wasn't perfect. My parents still struggled with accountability. Lauren occasionally slipped into old patterns. Ethan still assumed I would intervene if things became too difficult. But for the first time, I had control over my response, and that was enough. And in that control, I discovered freedom. I realized that boundaries weren't punishment, they were clarity. They weren't revenge, they were recognition. They weren't anger, they were assertion. And the family who had always assumed I would carry the weight? They were finally, undeniably, facing reality. For the first time, I wasn't last. I had removed myself from the line entirely. And in that quiet, deliberate act, I had reclaimed my life. Moral lessons. This story reminds us that love and loyalty don't mean sacrificing your own life, peace, or boundaries. It teaches that being dependable is valuable, but it should never come at the cost of your well-being. Setting clear limits is not selfish, it's an act of self-respect, and it forces others to take responsibility for their own actions. The story encourages anyone feeling invisible or overburdened in family dynamics to pause, reflect, and prioritize themselves without guilt. True growth, both for you and those around you, comes when boundaries are drawn firmly and compassionately, showing that accountability and care can coexist. If you've ever felt last, Bella's journey is proof that choosing yourself first doesn't close the door on family, it transforms it.